Hey guys, DJ here at Top Tech Cards and Games, and today I'm going to be doing a forcible deck profile for the Darkness, Wind, Fire Scheherazade deck. So our hero is the Liberator of Wind / Scheherazade, and our mana base, stone base rather, is one Featsing. You can stack this with Scheherazade in a lot of matchups to avoid the risk of ever hitting it with Gretel, which we play. But in some matchups you'll need to make sure you have a turn 1 red source, or make sure you get the early black mana to play around, fire and darkness. Sorry, I'm trying to get over to the actual terminology instead of using magic terms. To ensure that you can play a turn 1 thunder or play an early 0 or something to handle their aggression. But we have Featsing, 4 Magic Stone of Blasting Waves, 4 Magic Stone of Black Silence, and then 1 basic Magic Stone of Wind. Now for our Resonators, we have 4 Elvish Priests. Elvish Priest is a kind of clunky card in this deck. It's not good to draw late game. You really do want to see it turn 1 though, and the reason for that, and the same reason that we're packing 4 Gretels, is this is a very reactive deck, but you want to make sure you have as much mana up to fight your opponent on what they do as much as possible. You're never going to be asking the questions, laying the threats. You're always going to be reacting what your opponent does and making sure you deal with it as effectively as possible while trying to put some form of damage on the board to clock them out somehow. In that sphere, we have 3-0 and 3 Featsing. Featsing was a 4-up for a long time in my list, and 4 might actually be correct, because going off of what I said about those last 2 things, you want to put a clock on your opponent, you want to react as well as possible, and you want to have more mana so you can fight them on what they do. I recently moved the 4th one to the sideboard just to test a card in my main deck, and I think that 3 is doable. These cards are both very relevant in dealing with aggressive strategies, and this one can come down, make a card not do damage, block another card, or make a card not do damage and block it to kill it, and then create more mana, or most importantly, being unthunderable too makes it a really good threat to close the game out. I mean, it doesn't do it quickly, but it still does it. This guy is so good. It can clear your opponent's board when they're playing an aggressive deck. Looking at my things, for instance, it'll kill all the Gretels just to get them off the board, it'll take all the Cheshire Cats off the board. Just a bunch of things. And it can trade really favorably with cards with less than 500 attack, or less than 600 attack. Since they attack, they go down, they get blocked. It's just pure advantage. And then this one does die to Thunder, but does put a faster clock on. Not substantially faster, it's only at 1 turn really. But 700 does fight a lot of things better. And then we have 1 win condition type card, 1 Blazer. Blazer is super hard to deal with in a deck like this. We're packing a ton of counter magic, so you can protect him very well. And eventually the Blazer will have to get there, since you'll be able to replay him once you get control of the game and keep attacking with the 11-11. So he's not the most exciting card. The original list I actually played didn't play any win conditions, and I won the tournament I played it in. But the one game that I had trouble with was a game where I went to time limit because I didn't have a way to actually kill my opponent. And I think that's actually the deck's biggest weak point, so I squeezed in Blazer. It's actually, you just never want to see this card until the game is basically locked up already, and then you just want to play it and attack with it and protect it, and eventually you'll kill them. It seems awkward to play so few ways to win the game. I've been trying to cut down on using magic comparisons when talking about decks for this game. What we've actually been calling this deck is Flash, though, which is a throwback to a magic deck called Blue-White Flash, which did the same thing. It basically just interacts on your opponent's turn, plays really no ways to actually kill them, just weenies them out with a bunch of, efficient cards while not letting your opponent actually play the game. But we did manage to squeeze in 1 win condition because time limit had been a bit of a struggle. And I think that part of that is not playing as tightly as possible and not making my decisions as quickly as possible. And part of it is just that the deck does not win fast when you're playing against other decks with similar strategies, packing a ton of removal and counter spells. They're going to do a lot of the same things you are, so it gets very hard to actually kill them on time. Next we're going to move on to our removal package, which we have 4 Stories Told in the 1001 Nights, 4 Flames of the Outer World, 4 copies of Thunder, and 1 copy of Void Blast. Void Blast is something I'm testing over what was a 1 of Stoning to Death. The remove is relevant against some cards in the metagame right now. Genesis Creation decks are seeing more play, so if you can remove the threat permanently from that card, and that matters, and this is cheaper when you have 0 in play. So, I mean, it's relevant. It's a 1 of. Stoning was a 1 of. That's what I figured I would try. Stories is such a good card against creature-based decks, especially decks like Grimm and decks that play Mephistopheles, and just being able to rid a deck of all of those cards is just so good. Or against a deck playing vampires, so like nail Carmilla on the field, you get one out of their hand too. Their engine is just totally disrupted. It does so much for so little. It is like a kind of an expensive kill spell at 3 mana, but it gets the job done all the time. It does everything you need it to do. It costs all green, which isn't really relevant in this deck because all of our stones produce wind. And it just does a lot. 3 could be considered. You could definitely consider shaving one of these for something else. Maybe put the other Feat Sting or another 0 in. But so far, 4 has been perfect. Flames of the Outer World is actually the reason that I made the deck play Fire and Darkness. This deck has a huge issue dealing with rulers, especially when you're not even playing like Blazer like I was before. You have no real way to attack them. You have no real way to interact with them. You can't counter a J activate. Flames fixes a lot of this. You can run a Gretel into a roller and then Flames it. You can play Flames and then Thunder. Like, just these cards are almost necessary because you need to be able to deal with J rollers. I was testing Crime and Punishment for a little bit. It was okay, but like good Abdul players realized they could just not attack with their Abdul. So you would just have a lot of trouble dealing with threats. But these cards are very necessary to deal with J rollers. Is the reason I think the deck has to be in these colors to be optimal. And then the one of Void Blast is just an extra kill spell. Again, we probably could shave Void Blast or one of the stories to play some other sort of interaction, but so far just playing removal, counter spells, and dudes has been insanely good. Then we have our counter suite, which is a full 4 of everything. 4 Exceed, 4 Cake Zone, and 4 Zeeks. Someone didn't do something quite right when they were designing the counter spells in this game. Like, all of your spells shouldn't draw a card. They shouldn't just cantrip when you counter a spell. Like, you should make the trade-off of simplifying the game state. But 8 of our counter spells replace themselves, which means as we let our opponent not play the game, we're advancing our game state. That's just insane, and I want to play as much of that as possible. I think you could actually shave a copy of Cake Zone, but A, Genesis Creation is a really strong card, and B, once you start playing this deck more and you start playing against other green decks, playing wind decks, playing Counter Wars all the time, you'll be like, wow, I really wish I could have just countered their counter, and you'll just end up back at 12. A lot of people say, well, why 4 Zeeks? Zeeks is actually the most important card in the deck, other than like Exceed, but like the most important counter spell to play 4 of. Because another thing other than rollers, these are the 3 things the deck has a big issue with. I already went over rollers, and then the next 2 things are Blazer and Necronomicon. Necronomicon's not as bad because this card counters it too, but for Blazer you only have these 8. When you kill a Blazer, they just recast it. You can't block it all day. You have a finite number of resources. You could recast your Blazer now that I'm playing it and just block continuously, but that's like a very average plan. You know, you're saying I'll spend 5 mana to trade with your 5 mana every turn, and that leaves you with, at the latest state of the impossible, like 5 more mana to advance your own game state while holding up counter magic, and that's just a terrible plan. Like, you're not going to win the game that way. So you need to be able to make sure their Blazer goes away. This card counters Blazer and shuffles and graveyards for Necronomicon. So you have 12 counters for Necro, 8 counters for Blazer, and then we have our burn spells in our own Blazer to deal with rollers. So you don't have a ton of outs to the deck's big issues, but you have enough of them. Zeeks is actually just like the best card, though. Countering Blazer, shuffling engravers for Necronomicon, and protecting your own threats from removal. It might seem like you don't really want to spend counters protecting your Feat Sting or your 0, but like you have to win the game somehow. And by choosing not to play threats, it means you have to invest more into protecting the threats that you do have. Some games you're gonna and start the game with some fast mana, play Feat Sting turn 2, and you're just gonna protect it and attack for 5 with it until they die. Maybe you'll flip Scheherazade and attack for 7 until they die. Like, that's just how the deck works. You just protect your little threats continuously and keep your opponent off base and just attack them. Like, you grind extremely well, you go to the late game extremely well because of that, or because of all those counter spells, and the deck's only real weaknesses are against rollers, Blazer, Necronomicon. So what you can gather from that is that some of the other control matchups are pretty weak. Because of this, I'm going to go over the sideboard now. There is a copy of Necronomicon on my sideboard. Going late in the game, you can tutor for it, which means like you can just turn back on all of your counter spells you've already used, double up on them, flip search whenever you have protection, and just make sure your Necronomicon resolves and take the game over from there. This was actually an inclusion that we added to beat the Pandora matchup, because we were like, well, how do we win once we get our grip full of 7 counter spells discarded? And the answer is, oh, we flip Scheherazade, search Necronomicon. Like, you just win the game. They can't keep counter magic up and flip Pandora. The next thing in our sideboard is 4 copies of Spiral of Despair. Spiral is super good against other countered Magic decks. Discarding, like, you force them to either spend a Cake Zone on that, which is fine. Now I can resolve my business spells. Or they just discard 2 cards. So the card advantage is sick. It doesn't matter that, you know, they get to choose the cards. Like, all of the cards in their hand are going to be good, I promise. Like, unless they're discarding Elf Gretel, and even then, like, they're simplifying the game state, which is favorable for us. We have 12 counter spells and 13 removal spells. Like, these are all things that we're okay with. Is there anything else for the... Oh, yeah, one other card for the control matchups. 1 Glinda. This is just something I'm testing right now. It might end up being more copies of Glinda, maybe a split with Spiral of Despair. But from playing against an Abdul player playing Glinda, it made the matchup very, very awkwardly hard. They play Glinda, like, it doesn't even have to make it a real threat unblockable. Like, they just get to squeeze into 2 damage with a Gretel or something. But what this card does is not allow you to, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Profitably trade counterspells, because one of yours is going to cost 2 more mana, 2 more will, which will make the trade go drastically in their favor. So suddenly this card demands a Thunder. Now when you have to Thunder this card, that's a Thunder that you can't point at the roller, and it complicates the matchup so much. And it's like, if an Abdul player was playing 4 of these in their sideboard or something, I don't think you'd be able to win the matchup anymore, and I would have to tweak my deck a little more to accommodate. For the most part, like, that's not an actual situation, and one of the cards that helps deal with that are 2 of these Awakening in the Ends that I'm playing. And this card might need to be a 3 of in the sideboard in that situation. This card is super slow against aggro, but you would bring it in anyway. It's really good against decks like Grim. It's really good in the mirror because it kills just every creature we play except for Blazer. Again, probably should just be a 3 of actually, but I'm testing the Glinda for right now. But this card deals with so much. Then we have 2 Bloody Moons, which are good against some of the control decks, some of the like aggro decks. The big thing is the deck has a pretty strong inherent weakness to Feathsing because we don't trade through creature combat really. We trade by playing counter spells and kill spells on their guys. So when you're playing kill spells and they have a Feathsing up, like now my cards are all super inefficient because they just have, you know, a costless counterspell for them. And you really need Blood Moon to get rid of Feathsing. Like, it's really unfortunate that you have to use sideboard slots on the cards to kill it, but you do. This card's also very good against some of the greedier mana bases, so that's a plus. Then, one of the biggest counter matchups for the deck actually is Dracula. Seeing as you already have enough trouble dealing with rulers as it is, and that deck also gets to play Necronomicon, which I mentioned as being a bad thing, and the ruler just flips back over, he's got Imperishable, you can just keep playing him. I had to sideboard Christie for that matchup to make it go in my favor. That's not a huge loss, really. Christie just instantly makes the matchup okay, but to go with Christie, I had to bring in some copies of Stoning to Death, and then there's a Rapid Decay in here to deal with aggro decks and to come in when I bring in Christie, because Stories Told in 1001 Nights is a very, very average card when your ruler isn't Scheherazade, as opposed to being an absolutely bonkers card when your ruler is Scheherazade. Then the last slot on my sideboard is 1 more Feathsing. This isn't here because I'm just not sure if it's correct to not be playing it. I could use this to make that other Awakening in the end of my sideboard or something. So actually I was siding the Blazer before because I was worried about timing control matchups, and I kind of just swapped them because the time issue was very real, though again it could just be me needing to play tighter. But Feasting is a really good card, so I wanted to keep the 4th one in my sideboard for when I inevitably decide, man, I wish I was still playing 4. But overall, that's the list. Christie can also deal with Blazers, which is a cool thing, removing his effects and killing him, so he just goes to the yard. So, I mean, that's neat. You're not going to bring her in against just every deck playing Blazer to deal with him, but that's an option that exists, which is a really good thing to have. Like, the absolute nightmare is playing against Dracula, playing Necronomicon, and Blazer. It's like, that's so many things that are hard for your deck to deal with, and, like, it's just a natural counter. But you can beat it, tight play, bringing in the Christie game too, sideboarding properly. Like, it's all doable. Overall, this deck doesn't actually have bad matchups against much of anything. One of the things that might need to go in the sideboard is Law of Silence, which would awkwardly go in to fight other decks that are trying to play Law of Silence like proactively. Because one of the things that the newer Reanimator deck is doing is going like, draw, cast Law of Silence, you can't play counter spells, now I'll cast my Genesis of Creation. And I could bring in more counter spells effectively by also bringing Law of Silence, so we get a Law of Silence, and instead of me having to fight a counter war with it, like counter and then keep a counter up for their Genesis Creation, I could just blanket for the turn and go, okay, I'll respond with Law of Silence, like, you can't play your spell either now. And, like, that's not a great trade, but it's one of the few ways you can really combat that, because, like, you do have, like, you have so many of them, but they are finite. You do only have 12 counter spells. That sounds preposterous to say, like, yeah, you have 12 counter spells. Obviously, you're going to have a lot of them. But like on turn 4, when your opponent casts a lot of silence, you counter it, and then they go, all right, well, I'll just slam the Genesis Wave in, or Genesis Creation in. Like, how many more counter spells can you have there? You've already used one. You have seen a very limited number of cards. One of the options might be to cut Elf, switch my mana base around, maybe put Cheshire Cat in or some other, like the Green Cat, to see more cards early, just to make sure I find the right number of counter spells to deal with that. Playing Green Cat helps shore up the aggro matchup. Playing Cheshire Cat helps shore up the matchups against other control decks and like the combo decks by making sure you find the right spells you need. But overall, I'm very happy with the way this list as is has been performing. I'm not going to change anything until I play some more games against the whole field, see how my deck works, and see which cards are lackluster. Overall, I think this is one of the strongest decks in the metagame. I think it's a deck you need to be prepared to play against and be prepared for some really long grindy games, because this deck does not know how to end the game quickly. For your own sake, it's worth noting to concede to save time at some points. I know a lot of the people I played against pushed me very close to time by playing out games that were more or less lost. And that sounds bad because you should try to win games, but there reaches a point where your opponent is holding 7 cards, you're not holding any, and the game is more or less lost. You're hurting yourself by going to time there. You're giving yourself less opportunities to play more games. If you win game 2 and go to time anyway, now it's a 1-1 game in time and you have to settle for the draw, and that's reducing your opportunities to win. Granted, if you just play game 1 out and get there, then God bless, you're probably winning the match because you've used that much time. But that's something in general I think players need to be cognizant of in card games. The clock is your enemy sometimes. Sometimes you need to just save time, move on to the next game, and accept the loss for your own good. Obviously, that's a bigger complaint for me because I'm playing the slow deck, so when I'm taking my time, again, I should just learn to play it faster. That's the moral of the story. Be prepared to be in the tank a lot with this deck, making sure you make the optimal decision, and as you learn to play the deck better and make your decisions faster, you'll notice that these things I'm complaining about all the time become way less of an issue. But other than that, there's not much to say about the deck. It's got a lot of good matchups, doesn't have too many terrible ones, and this is a pretty complete main sideboard everything. There are some different variants you can play. You can play the greedy mana base, playing gosh, I don't know the name of the card. The land that, or the stone that taps for any color of will for 200 life points, and the stone that copies mana that your other stones could produce. And you can play whichever colors you want then. You can play any cards you want. It doesn't make a huge difference against burn, especially if you just play one of the special stone, but then you make your deck very weak to Bloody Moon. But the option is there. You can make your deck produce whatever colors you want at the cost of a little bit of life, and if you play more copies of it, you can blank the Bloody Moon weakness, but then it's at the cost of a lot of life. I was very, very scared of aggro when I first made this deck, which has influenced a lot of the decisions I made. I was very scared of mono red. Through a lot of testing, the matchup isn't very bad. It's got all the tools you need to beat the deck, so I could probably soften up on my mono red hate. But that's the deck. That's a pretty good rundown of it. If you have questions about the deck, especially playing the deck and things like making your decisions faster so you can avoid the clock, let me know down in the comments. Let me know if you have questions about playing your other decks against decks like this. I'd be more than happy to answer. And other than that, we'll have a lot more forceful stuff coming soon for you guys. Thanks for watching.